All right, strap in, everybody, because today we are going deep
Oh.
into the legal side of information security,
Ooh.
which, as you know, can be a little bit intimidating even for seasoned tech professionals.
Right.
Yeah, so we're going to try to demystify all the laws and regulations that come into play,
Sure.
not so that we can become lawyers,
Right.
but just so we can get a better grasp on, how this affects what we do in the tech world every day.
Absolutely.
Our primary source for this deep dive is a YouTube video that is essentially a cram session
Okay.
for the CISSP exam, and we'll be layering on some additional notes to kind of give more context.
Sounds good.
So our CISSP guide starts off by categorizing laws into three main types:
Okay.
criminal, civil,
Yeah.
and administrative.
Right.
And it might seem pretty basic at first glance,
Sure.
but the consequences are really, really different depending on which one you're dealing with.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like the difference between, accidentally sharing a file that you shouldn't have
Right.
versus, intentionally hacking into a government system.
Yeah.
One is you might get in trouble with your company or a regulatory body, and the other one is like federal prison.
Right. Jail time versus a slap on the wrist. So very good reason to be paying attention.
Exactly.
Exactly. And although our main source is really U.S.-centric,
Yeah.
it does touch on how EU regulations can also affect American companies.
Of course, because we live in a global world,
Yeah.
right? The internet is global.
Right.
So data sovereignty is a really big topic right now.
Yeah.
The idea that the data is subject to the laws of whatever country it is stored in.
Right.
And a great example is GDPR,
GDPR.
the EU's General Data Protection Regulation,
Yeah.
which affects any company that's collecting data from EU residents,
Wow.
no matter where that company is based.
Okay, so GDPR, that's the one that gives us more control over our data.
Right, exactly.
Okay, let's go back to the U.S. for a second.
Sure.
The Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, this one really caught my attention, particularly this part about unauthorized and malicious activities.
Right.
And it begs the question, how do we even define malicious?
That's a good question.
What if you accidentally mess something up? Could that be considered criminal?
Well, proving intent when it comes to cybercrime can be really tricky.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's obvious, but a lot of times there are gray areas.
Right.
But what's interesting is that, the law has had to evolve to keep pace with technology.
Uh-huh.
A good example is the Economic Espionage Act
Okay.
that broadened the definition of theft
Okay.
to include intellectual property.
Right.
So it's no longer limited to physical things,
Okay.
which makes sense because so much of what we consider valuable now is digital.
So stealing a design file is just as bad as stealing a physical prototype.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting. Okay, let's talk about the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA.
Okay.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that software can be considered a literary work.
Right. It's kind of strange to think about.
Yeah, who knew?
Right.
And the fact that copyright protection can last for 70 years, is
Yeah.
that really necessary for every single line of code?
Well, that's kind of the balancing act with copyright, right?
Yeah.
You want to protect the creator's rights,
Sure.
but then you also want to make sure that eventually things go into the public domain so that everybody can benefit from them.
Right. It's a tough one.
It is. And it's worth pointing out that there are different types of intellectual property,
Okay.
like trademarks, patents, trade secrets.
Right.
They all have different lengths of protection.
Interesting.
Okay. So it's a complex system, but it's there for a reason.
All right, let's get real for a second.
Okay.
Have you ever actually read a click-through license agreement?
And
And if so, did you understand any of it?
well, let's be honest. Most of us just click agree
Right.
without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
But it is important to understand those agreements,
Right.
especially now with cloud services.
Right. Because that's a whole other layer.
It's a whole other layer, and it can get really confusing.
Yeah, it can. Okay. I gotta admit, reading about the USA Patriot Act definitely set off my Big Brother alarm bells.
Yeah, I can understand that.
The expansion of wiretapping powers,
Yeah.
is that level of surveillance really justified even in the name of security?
Well, the Patriot Act is definitely a thorny issue,
Yeah.
and it's very controversial.
Uh-huh.
It raises a lot of questions about, individual privacy versus national security.
Right.
And it's been the subject of a lot of debate.
Yeah.
And what it really did was change the way the government interacts with internet service providers.
Uh-huh.
It gave them more power to access user data.
Wow. Okay. So a trade-off for sure.
Definitely a trade-off.
Okay. Let's move on to healthcare, where
Right.
things get even more sensitive.
For sure.
Hippotea and high tech are kind of the big players here.
Right.
Why is protecting health information so different from, say, financial data?
Well, think about it. Your health information is very personal. It can be used against you
Yeah.
in ways that your financial information really can't.
Okay.
Think about if someone's entire medical history was made public,
Yeah.
it can be devastating.
Right.
And what HIKE did was it expanded HIPAA
Okay.
to include business associates,
Business associates being...
companies that handle PHI on behalf of healthcare providers.
Right.
So like IT vendors, billing companies, things like that.
Okay.
They're held to the same standards as the healthcare providers themselves
Interesting.
because it's a shared responsibility.
Right. Everybody's got to play a part.
Exactly.
Okay. Remember GDPR from earlier?
Yeah.
One thing that always makes me think is the right to be forgotten.
Right.
The idea that you can just erase your digital footprint.
It's a nice thought.
It is a nice thought, but is it even possible?
Well, the right to be forgotten is actually very complex,
Okay.
both legally and practically.
Okay.
It is about giving individuals more control over their data,
Right.
but there are a lot of limitations and challenges to actually implementing it. Right.
And don't forget, it applies to any organization collecting data from EU residents.
Wow.
So the impact is global.
Okay, so global impact for sure.
Yeah.
All right, last but not least, PCI DSS.
Oh, yeah. The unsung hero.
Yeah, this is the one that most people have never heard of,
Right.
but it affects all of us every day.
Every time you swipe your card.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's what keeps our credit card info safe.
pretty much.
And here's the kicker. It was actually created by the credit card companies themselves.
Yeah, they all got together.
Yeah. Visa, MasterCard, Discover American Express.
And they said, we need to do something to protect this data.
Right.
So they created this standard.
Talk about industry teamwork.
It's pretty amazing when you think about it.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
That was a lot to absorb.
It was a lot.
And we're just getting started.
We're just scratching the surface.
We'll be right back to dig even deeper into this legal maze, so stay tuned.
Yeah, we are just getting warmed up.
I know, my brain is already full.
It's a lot, but I think it's good stuff to know. Yeah, I mean, even having a basic understanding of this stuff, I think, can be super helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay, so to that end,
Okay,
let's look at some real-world examples.
sure.
Remember the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act? The one with the unauthorized and malicious activities?
Yeah.
It's not just about hacking.
Yeah?
It also covers protecting federal systems,
Right.
breaking into the FBI's network.
Exactly.
Okay.
So it's a crime to access classified information or financial data
Yeah.
within a federal system
Okay.
without permission.
That makes sense.
Right.
Given how much sensitive data they handle.
And it's not just preventing access.
Right.
It also covers intentionally damaging those systems. Like imagine if somebody took down critical government infrastructure through a cyber attack.
Yeah. The stakes are pretty high.
Very high.
Okay. Speaking of consequences, the CISSP material mentions the federal sentencing guidelines.
Right.
Which sounds a little bit intimidating, but I guess it serves a purpose.
It does. They were created to help federal judges apply computer crime laws consistently
Okay.
when it comes to sentencing.
Okay.
And it basically formalizes the prudent man rule,
Oh, right. The prudent man rule.
which is all about taking reasonable steps to prevent harm.
Yeah.
We talked about that with due care.
Right. So if you're responsible for a system, you should take the same precautions a reasonable person would.
Right,
Sounds
to
good.
keep it secure.
Gotcha.
And the federal sentencing guidelines actually lay out 3 things that have to be proven
Okay.
for somebody to be found negligent.
Okay. What's the first one?
The first one is that the person accused of negligence has to have a legally recognized obligation.
Okay.
So, for example, senior executives
Right.
have a responsibility to make sure their organization is taking due care when it comes to security.
Right. So it's not just about individual actions, but the responsibility of those in charge.
Exactly.
What's number 2?
Number 2 is they have to prove that the person failed to meet those standards.
Yep.
So they didn't take those reasonable steps
Okay.
that were expected of them, given their role and the situation.
And last but not least.
And the third thing is that there has to be a clear connection between that act of negligence
Okay.
and the damage that resulted.
Okay.
So it's not enough to just fail to meet the standards.
Okay.
You have to show that those actions directly led to the negative outcome.
So like cause and effect.
Yep.
If
Yeah.
somebody didn't follow proper security procedures and that led to a data breach, then they could be considered negligent.
Right.
You got it. Okay. Gotcha. Those are good ones to remember.
They are.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit and revisit high paw and high tech.
Okay.
We touched on them briefly, but I think it's worth digging a little deeper
For sure.
into how they impact healthcare.
Absolutely. HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act,
Okay.
is the foundation of healthcare data protection in the U.S.
Okay.
It lays out all these strict security measures
Okay.
for hospitals, doctors, insurance companies, anybody who deals with what's called protected health information,
PHI,
or PHI.
which is basically any information that can identify someone that's related to their health or healthcare.
Exactly. Things like medical records, billing information,
Right.
even conversations between doctors and patients.
Wow, okay.
All that is protected.
So HIPAA mandates safeguards to protect all this data,
Yes.
both in physical and electronic forms.
Both.
And that's where ITech comes in.
Yes, PRITEC, the Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health Act
Right, from 2009.
from 2009.
It kind of adds another layer to HIPAA.
Exactly. It came about as the use of electronic health records was exploding
Right.
and the threat landscape was evolving.
Okay.
It really reinforces the privacy and security parts of IPAY
Okay.
and extends its reach to include business associates,
Business associates being...
those third-party companies that handle PHI on behalf of healthcare providers.
Okay, so like...
So the IT vendors, billing companies, things like that,
Yeah.
they're all included now.
So HITech recognizes that data security is a shared responsibility.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's not just on the healthcare provider.
Gotcha.
Everyone who touches that data has to be just as careful.
So business associates are held to the same standards as the healthcare providers themselves
That's right.
when it comes to safeguarding PHI.
And it also brought in stricter rules about notifying people and the government
Okay.
when a breach occurs.
It makes sense. It's not just about securing data within a single organization anymore. It's
Right.
about making sure that anybody who interacts with that data is just as careful.
Exactly.
Okay. So from your perspective, what's kind of the biggest takeaway from HIPAA and HITech?
For me, it's the recognition that healthcare data needs a higher level of protection.
Yeah.
The potential harm from a PHI breach can be devastating,
Right.
both for individuals and for the organizations involved.
Right.
These regulations really emphasize the need for a comprehensive approach to security,
Mm-hmm.
covering administrative, technical, and physical safeguards.
Comprehensive approach. So it's not just about having a firewall. It's about building a culture of security
Exactly.
across the board.
And employee training and awareness are a big part of that.
Right.
You know, even with the best technology, human error is still a major factor in data breaches.
Right. We're all human.
We are.
Mistakes happen.
We do.
Okay. Now let's talk about a law that's caused a lot of debate.
Okay.
The USA Patriot Act.
Right.
Depending on your viewpoint, you might see this as a strength or a weakness.
I can see that.
But we mentioned it earlier, but it's worth revisiting because it had such a big impact on surveillance powers.
It did. The Patriot Act passed after 9/11
Right.
really expanded the government's ability to conduct surveillance,
Uh-huh.
including electronic surveillance in the name of national security.
Okay.
And one of the most talked about parts is how it changed wiretapping.
Okay, so before the Patriot Act.
Before the Patriot Act, law enforcement had to request wiretaps on a circuit-by-circuit basis, which meant getting separate warrants for different types of communication.
Okay, so like a warrant for phone calls, a warrant for emails.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the Patriot Act introduced roving wiretaps,
Roving wiretaps.
which means a single warrant can cover all communications
Wow.
to and from a specific person, no matter what device or service they're using.
Okay.
So it's like shifting from targeting a specific location to targeting a specific individual.
Okay, interesting.
And it also gave the government easier access to records held by internet service providers.
Okay.
So things like browsing history, email logs,
Wow.
other potentially sensitive data.
Wow. Okay, so a lot more access.
A lot more access.
It's important to note, though, that the Patriot Act has faced a lot of debate
It has.
and legal challenges since it was enacted.
A lot of people have concerns about individual privacy and civil liberties.
Right.
And there have been efforts to reform or even repeal certain parts of it.
So it's not a simple issue.
It's not.
There are valid arguments on both sides.
There-
The government argues that these expanded powers are necessary to prevent terrorism and to keep the country safe.
Right.
But privacy advocates worry about potential abuse and the chilling effect it could have on free speech.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It is.
It's about balancing security and freedom in the digital age.
Right.
And it's a conversation we need to keep having as technology advances.
Right, because technology is always changing
That is
and new threats are emerging.
all the time.
Okay. So it's really up to us as informed citizens to
Okay.
understand these laws and their impact.
Absolutely.
So we can participate in these discussions
Right.
and advocate for policies that, align with our values.
That's what it's all about.
Okay. Speaking of staying informed, let's shift gears to a topic that might not be as well known
Okay.
as HPA or the Patriot Act,
Okay.
but it impacts our lives every day.
It does.
The Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, or PCI DSS.
PCI DSS.
This is all about keeping our credit card data safe and preventing fraud.
It's a great example of how different players in an industry can come together to improve security.
Yeah. So what's interesting about this is that it's not a law
Right.
or a regulation
It's not.
in the traditional sense.
No, it was created and is enforced by the major credit card companies themselves.
Really?
Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express.
Wow.
They all got together and said, we need to do something to protect this data.
Right.
So they created this standard.
So it's kind of like a self-regulating system
Exactly.
that applies to any organization that handles credit card data.
If you're dealing with credit cards, you need to be PCI DSS compliant.
And compliance is mandatory
Mandatory.
for merchants and service providers that process, store, or transmit cardholder information.
Right.
And there's some serious consequences for not complying.
Oh, yeah, big fines.
Big fines.
Big damage to your reputation.
You don't want to mess around with that.
No, you don't.
So whether you're a tiny online shop or a huge corporation, if you're dealing with credit cards, you need to be PCI DSS compliant.
That's right.
So these standards cover a wide range of security controls,
You do.
from building a secure network protecting cardholder data to implementing strong access controls.
Right.
So it's a pretty comprehensive framework
Is.
that aims to address security at every point in the payment card process
And it's constantly evolving. New
Right.
versions come out all the time.
to keep up with new threats
Yeah.
and technologies.
Exactly.
Just goes to show that security is an ongoing process,
It is.
not a one-time fix.
It's a journey, not a destination.
That's right.
Yeah.
So what stands out to you about PCI DSS?
For me, it's a great example of how industry standards can raise the bar for security across the board, by setting clear requirements
Right.
and holding organizations accountable.
Yeah.
It helps protect sensitive cardholder data
Okay.
and reduce the risk of fraud.
Right. It's a good reminder that security is everyone's responsibility. It's not just on the IT folks or the security professionals. It's everyone who handles sensitive information,
If you touch data, you have a responsibility to protect it.
whether it's credit card numbers, healthcare records, or government secrets.
That's right.
We all have a role to play
We do.
in keeping it safe.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And that's why understanding these legal and regulatory frameworks is so crucial.
Yeah.
By knowing our rights and responsibilities,
Mhm.
we can all contribute to a more secure and privacy-conscious digital world.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was a lot to digest.
It was.
We've explored everything from the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and the complexities of proving intent in cybercrime
Yeah.
to the balance between security and privacy in the Patriot Act
Right.
and the industry-driven approach to data protection in
Huh.
the PCI DSS.
Yeah, we covered a lot of ground, highlighted key concepts, real-world examples, to show how these laws and standards actually play out.
Yeah. It's been an eye-opening journey so far.
It has.
And I hope our listeners are getting a better sense of how legal and regulatory frameworks
Right.
shape the digital world we live in.
They're all around us,
They are.
even if we don't see them.
That's right. But we're not done yet.
No.
We've got one more segment
One more.
to wrap up our deep dive
Okay.
into this fascinating
It is fascinating.
and ever-evolving world of information security law.
I love it.
Stay with us.
And we are back for the final leg of our legal deep dive.
All right.
My brain is definitely full
I know, right?
after all those laws and regulations,
So many.
but in a good way.
I think so, too.
Okay, so before we wrap up,
Okay.
there are a couple more things from our source material I wanted to touch on.
Okay. So good.
First up is FISMA,
FISMA.
the Federal Information Security Management Act.
Okay.
This one seems to be all about government agencies.
Yeah, it's all about making sure that those computer systems that are used by the federal agencies
Uh-huh.
are secure.
So it requires them to develop and implement information security programs.
Okay.
And it covers contractors as well.
Contractors.
So anybody who's working with the government.
Right, so it's not just about internal security, but making sure that anybody interacting with government systems is playing by the rules.
Exactly.
Which makes sense given how much sensitive data is involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
So FISMA also mandates that agencies conduct risk assessments,
Yes.
implement security controls, and even have incident response plans in place.
It's a very thorough approach to information security.
Right.
Trying to protect government data from all kinds of threats.
So kind of like a security blanket
You could say that.
for government data.
Yeah.
All right, one last topic to tackle before we sign off.
Okay.
And it's one that's especially relevant for us curious minds.
Let's hear it.
Copyright.
Copyright.
Specifically, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or DMCA.
Oh, yeah, the DMCA.
So the DMCA came about in 1998
Back in the day.
to address copyright issues in the digital age.
Right, because things were changing rapidly.
They were back then, yeah. And it's probably best known for protecting digital works, like software music and movies, from unauthorized copying and sharing.
Makes sense.
And remember how we were talking about software being categorized as a literary work?
Oh, yeah.
That actually comes straight from the DMCA.
It does.
So it puts software under the same copyright protection as traditional written works.
Interesting.
The DMCA also makes it illegal to bypass those technological measures that are used to protect copyrighted works, like DRM software or digital rights management.
Right.
So it's an attempt to, address the unique challenges of enforcing copyright in a digital world where copying and sharing are so easy.
It's like trying to put a genie back in the bottle.
Yeah, it is.
Once it's out there, it's out there.
Right.
So how do you control that?
Yeah, exactly. It's a fascinating area of law.
It is.
And it keeps changing as technology advances. And new forms of digital content pop up all the time.
All the time.
It makes you wonder, what will copyright even look like in 10 or 20 years?
Right. What even is ownership in the digital age?
Right.
It's a good question.
It is. It's a really good question. Okay, I think we've officially reached information overload.
Yeah, I think so too.
For one episode.
We covered a lot.
But before we go, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Okay, hit me.
Our source material ends with this really thought-provoking question.
Good.
Given how quickly technology changes and the constantly shifting landscape of threats, how can we as individuals and organizations stay ahead of the curve when it comes to legal and regulatory compliance in this whole realm of information security?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
It is. It really is. It feels like a moving target.
It does, but I think a big part of it is just never stop learning.
Right.
The legal and regulatory world is constantly evolving.
It is.
So there's got to stay up to date on the new laws and regulations.
That's right.
The industry standards.
So it's like continuous education.
It is.
For anybody involved in tech.
Absolutely.
Subscribe to industry newsletters, go to conferences, explore online resources.
Right. There's so much information out there.
Yeah.
You just have to know where to look.
You do. And don't be shy about asking questions.
That's right.
Reach out to legal experts.
Talk to your peers in the industry.
Connect with professional organizations.
It's involved.
The more you engage with this topic, the better equipped you'll be to navigate its complexities.
Absolutely.
All right, well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the world of information security law.
Wow, what a ride.
It has been a whirlwind tour.
It has.
But I hope you've gained some valuable insights.
Think so.
And a newfound appreciation for the crucial role
it is crucial
that legal and regulatory frameworks play.
They're the scaffolding.
They are.
That holds everything up
in
our digital world.
That's right. Until next time, stay curious, keep those minds engaged, and keep exploring the ever-evolving landscape of information security.
See you next time.